Analysts are warning that January is going to be a huge mess. America's mom and pop landlords, as well as millions of tenants, will be in huge trouble as soon as safety nets that prevented mass evictions up until this point expire. Tenants haven't been able to pay rent for months, and when the moratorium expires in December, all of their rental debt will come due. Tens of billions in back rent were accumulated, adding immense financial pressure on property owners and operators, some of whom have already failed to meet their mortgage payments, which could potentially prompt a fire sale of properties next year. Without a doubt, 2020 has been a nightmarish year, but this Christmas will be the worst for millions of Americans and their families, as all benefits that have kept them afloat throughout the hardest economic downturn the U.S. has experienced since the Great Depression are said to expire in a matter of weeks, which will likely result in a tsunami of evictions during a very dark winter. While a highly contagious respiratory infection is fast spreading on the streets. In today's video, we're going to expose the latest data about the tragic homelessness crisis that's looming. So stay with us. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel to keep updated with future videos. Family property owners and millions of renters have been hanging by a thread since the burst of the sanitary outbreak. At this stage of the crisis, Congress's deadlock over the details of a new stimulus proposal is still lingering. But in the meantime, numerous households are falling into a housing abyss and soon will find themselves in a treacherous limbo as the remaining safety nets are set to expire a few weeks from now. Right after Christmas, enhanced unemployment benefits will be gone, and nearly 12 million people and their families will have their main source of financial support removed from their reach. Days after that, on New Year's Day, the CDC's eviction moratorium is scheduled to lapse, and those who have been protected by it may be dragged by the massive wave of evictions that has already started to form. According to recent estimates from one day to another, a whopping $70 billion bill of unpaid back rent and utilities will come due. Bloomberg projections estimate that 5.8 million households could face eviction by early 2021, while the Aspen Institute says that overall, up to 40 million people could be pushed out of their homes in the coming months. However, even though the main focus of the housing discussion has been about tenant circumstances, the lack of rental payment is leading mom-and-pop landlords to a financial cliff. The CEO of the National Apartment Association, Bob Pinniger, said that small property owners are under an unprecedented financial strain, as many of them have seen 8 to 9 months of non-payment from tenants. On the same note, the Associate Dean of South Texas College of Law, Catherine Burnett, has described that several small property owners still have multiple expenses to take care of, such as mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and repairs. It's a big problem, and it's a problem that impacts the renters and the landlords just as well, Burnett maintained. Right now, we're helping the tenants with the CDC declaration, but I think as a society we have to think, what's the impact on the mom and pop who have 3 or 4 rental properties? And that's how they're funding their retirement. They're people too, she said. This concern is also shared by Stacy Johnson Cosby, the president of the Kansas City Regional Housing Alliance, who pointed out that oftentimes landlords have been spending their retirement savings to cover the expenses of their properties since no money is flowing in. They're sheltering our citizens free of charge, and there's nothing we can do about it, she stated. Then adding that over 40% of the landlords surveyed in her coalition affirmed that they expected to have to sell their units in the months ahead due to the damage generated by rental income losses. Johnson Cosby disclosed that small landlords are also afraid of speaking out, worried they could spark rage of tenant rights groups who promote the cancel rent movement, which has been flooding landlords with publicity campaigns featuring their pictures and obstructing the entrance of apartment buildings and local courthouses in demonstrations of discontentment. What they don't realize is that if they run us out and we fail, it'll be private equity and Wall Street firms that buy up all our properties, just like they did with houses after the last foreclosure crash, she stressed. Indeed, after the burst of the housing bubble that led to the Great Recession of 2007 to 2008, small property owners that were deep in debt had to sell their properties to wealthy investors for a fraction of their actual prices. As Congress remains unresponsive to the urgent pleas of owners and tenants, it seems that the elites will absorb a large share of these properties into their monumental collection of assets once again. Although the next administration has announced plans to enact another stimulus bill, no one is talking about the 20 brutal days between the expiration of the programs and the inauguration day, which is precisely when the free fall will begin. Economists say that this 20-day gap might provoke an economic scarring so severe it could compromise the U.S. economic recovery for years and drive us back to another meltdown. Additionally, there aren't enough talks highlighting the fact that millions are about to be evicted during the coldest season of the year, and while a highly contagious respiratory infection continues to fatally victimize hundreds of thousands of Americans, mass evictions will certainly lead to an increase in confirmed viral cases across the country. According to researchers from Johns Hopkins University and 4 other universities, there were 433,700 excess viral cases and 10,700 excess casualties associated with the lifting of eviction moratoriums during the summer, and that's before the CDC protection was put into place. States that let moratoriums expire had a 2.1 times higher incidence of cases and 5.4 times more fatalities. Emily Benfer, a law professor at Wake Forest University School of Law, explained that when an eviction occurs, families end up doubling up, or they're transient. They're surfing from couch to couch or staying with friends and family, and this increases their contact with others, and it decreases their ability to comply with the CDC's mitigation strategies like self-quarantine and social distancing. Furthermore, she revealed to believe that the United States is facing the greatest eviction crisis we've ever seen in our country's history, while noting that renters are stretched threadbare. They are paying for rent with their food budgets. There's been an increase in food pantry requests as much as 2,000% in some states, Benfer outlined. Low-income tenants were particularly hard hit during the recession. Many of them have fallen between the cracks caused by the 72-hour lapse between the expiration of the previous moratorium and the introduction of the CDC's order on September 4th. That time gap has already allowed landlords to evict thousands of non-paying tenants, and many more are to come. Data from the Princeton University Eviction Lab, a national housing research center, informed that nationwide, on average, there are approximately 3.6 million eviction cases a year. But by early 2021, this figure could be doubled and trigger a homelessness crisis in proportions this country has never, ever seen before. Moreover, Princeton Lab's data that tracks 17 cities across the United States found that from the burst of the health crisis up until now, at least 60,000 evictions have been recorded. And despite we have seen a decline in registered evictions in metro areas after the CDC's eviction moratorium went into effect, that hasn't stopped some landlords in places like Columbus, Ohio, Jacksonville, Florida, and Gainesville, Florida, to continue to file eviction notices for non-paying tenants. In fact, because the CDC order is open to interpretation by judges, it provides loopholes for landlords to legally pursue eviction notices by justifying, for instance, that a tenant violated the lease's terms, engaged in criminal activity, or didn't comply with a stipulated payment plan. In states such as New York, homelessness isn't a new problem. But this year, New York City has witnessed an acute spike in the number of people living on the streets, and now that winter is coming, the combination of a contagious viral disease and cold weather could generate a calamity amongst the homeless and hungry from the city and beyond. A recent article reported that transit workers in the subways are seeing more people than usual seeking refuge in the tunnels, since the subways are still closed overnight and shelters are widely considered dangerous by those who need them. The same scene is about to be repeated in several states of our nation. The current recession has been monumentally difficult for everyone, forcing many to live in ways that they never thought they would. According to the most recent figures, 23,000 of our young Americans between 16 to 24 years old could be left without a home during this festive season, and these numbers are likely to rise well into the new year. Children are also threatened with homelessness, as the latest U.S. Census Bureau survey has signaled that at least 25% of renters with small children are unable to pay their rent. Many parents that were protected by the moratoriums are now becoming increasingly desperate with the end of the program, and the idea of having nowhere to live and nowhere to house their children. That's the case of Natasha Burns, who told Reuters she now owes over $7,000 in back rent and disclosed she will be financially devastated in the new year. She said in the report, "There's no way she can financially recover from this at the moment." She said, "If it wasn't for the CDC ban, my kids and I would be homeless." Similarly, also interviewed by Reuters, Latrice Bean, mother of a 5-year-old, is a worker in a software company. Similar to millions of other Americans, Latrice had her working hours reduced due to the economic downturn. Unable to afford a full rental payment, she was evicted with her daughter from her Milwaukee apartment and is now living in a temporary housing unit in a neighborhood even worse than the one before. "I feel so unlucky," she said. "I've really been through it." With an eviction on her record, it'll be much more difficult now to find appropriate housing to live with her child. Cases like these, especially amongst America's working poor, are about to be witnessed on a large scale. Nick Toman, a Milwaukee legal aid lawyer, revealed to Reuters that during the recession, his normal clientele shifted from individuals to entire households. "I hear these stories from entire families who are on the side of the street," says Toman, choking up during an interview with Reuters in his Milwaukee office. He continued, "These families have no place to go and no options. I think it's abundantly clear that the safety net is just not big enough to handle something like this." Toman has alerted that January is going to be a mess, making reference to the colossal amount of back rent that will come due. Nobody can get a new place because they have an eviction case pending against them, and they don't have any money anyway. To make matters worse for the working poor, some cities have allowed landlords to collect 20% of an evicted tenant's wages. Judgments enforcing tenants to pay back rent can compromise people's income for years. For that reason, Benfer says that as soon as the CDC order expires in the new year, millions upon millions of individuals and children will face eviction. They will face the health harms that it causes. They will be threatened with the current virus, perhaps, and they will also be hard-pressed to recover. Eviction is a jagged slide with no ladder back up. This is something that our country will be recovering from for generations to come. In a moment when the country has 10 million fewer jobs than it had in March, almost 6.7 million renter households, or approximately 19 million people, don't have any means to pay their rent. That's why Benfer argues that the likelihood of tenants being able to pay that back to a property owner without federal rent relief is very unlikely. This is one of the reasons why we need relief from Congress as quickly as possible. But while Congress keeps failing to take action, evictions, homelessness, hunger crises, and the continued collapse of America's working poor will continue to plague the economy. This crisis is far from over. In fact, all of these events signal that we're headed to a much deeper and devastating recession. We hope you found today's video informative and giving you plenty of food for thought. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Please share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel to keep updated with future videos.